Welcome back to Into the Gnar, where the cutting edge of software gets built. I'm Mike Stone here with my co-founder and co-host Nick Maloney. On today's episode, we're answering a question we get asked a lot, especially since the SaaS apocalypse. It's if you were starting a B2B SaaS company today with 18 months of runway, a team of 5, real customers to win, what would you actually build on? This is the episode to send to your CTO before your next architecture conversation, so let's get into it. Nick, we've seen a lot of code bases over the years. We've probably seen it all in the past decade. In your mind, what's the worst stack-related decision you've ever seen a client make, and what did it actually cost them?
That's a good one. The one that immediately comes to mind for me is more in infrastructure realm, but we'll call it stack. And it's you get a non-technical founder that hears that they must use AWS. And I'll preface this by saying there is nothing wrong with AWS, but it is a skill set. And we've seen this many times. We inherit this code base that has a super complex AWS setup that they don't know how to manage. And all of your time or our time is spent dealing with that and not shipping code. And it always ends up being that there's like no automation and everything's super janky. And we're having to go in and they're manually configuring Linux on EC2 instances, and everything is way overkill. And they spend just so much time and money on that versus just focusing on core product. We've seen other examples with some questionable tech stacks, but I think the number one example for me is probably the super overcomplicated AWS build on day one.
Yeah, I think there's like a common theme in what we're discussing kind of throughout the podcast, but related to this too, is that like the tools themselves often aren't the problem. It's the implementation itself that's the problem, right? Like there's nothing wrong with AWS, but you can F it up pretty good, just like you can F up just about anything. My mind went to we inherited a app from a overseas agency, I think it was at the time, that had an API endpoint where you could arbitrarily pass it queries that would execute on the database. Again, not a stack problem. It was a Node app, and people have their opinions there, but there's nothing inherently wrong with Node, but you can F it up pretty good there too, and they surely did. But yeah, more of a execution problem versus the stack itself. Hey, it's Mike. Before we continue, thank you for being here. Into the Gnar exists for one reason: to cut through the noise around custom software development and give you something actually useful. We want to build a community around that. So if something in this episode hit, or if there's a topic you want us to go deeper on, leave a comment. It genuinely shapes what we'll make next. Also, if AI is on your roadmap and you're not sure if your team's set up for it, we made something for you. It's a free 2-minute assessment over at thegnar.com that tells you exactly where you stand. Link is in the show notes. All right, back to the conversation. All right, let's get right into some news this week. This first story is a good one and connects directly to what we'll be talking about in the main segment. Cursor, Claude Code, and OpenAI's Codex, which are the 3 biggest AI coding tools on the market, they stopped competing with each other this week and started working together as layers in the same stack. Nobody designed this, it just happened. So Nick, we're all in on Claude Code here at Gnar, but would you recommend the 3-tool stack to this hypothetical scenario of a 5-person B2B SaaS team starting out today, or do you think this is overkill?
I think it's overkill. My immediate recommendation is just use Claude. It does code exceptionally well. It handles all of the other non-technical pieces through the desktop application and one billing. So it seems to overcomplicate it if you start to use all these different tools. And we don't use a bunch of different tools anymore either. We're standardized on Claude, and I've been real happy with it.
So what do you think about like over reliance on one LLM? Like one thing that I think is cool here is that Codex released a Claude Code plugin that gives you skills like using Codex to review code. And that to me seems really cool and not over engineering, because you essentially have a different brain, a different person reviewing code that, was generated by a different LLM.
Yeah, and I like the standardization on like agent tools, for instance. So the skills that you're writing are applicable to the other providers. And we have been bitten by being reliant on one. Like for instance, we had run out of tokens before and tried Gemini, which we have an account to our workspace on, but it just isn't as good. I think these are fine. It's I think for me a known risk that we incur for having a simpler stack, but it hasn't bitten us enough to overcomplicate things. And maybe larger orgs, that's a different matter, and you have an entirely different setup. Maybe you're using Bedrock and it's all abstracted. But I think for most startups, I still wouldn't hesitate to use and recommend Claude, knowing what the compromises are.
Yeah, so if you're talking to a company choosing a tech stack, how much does the AI tool compatibility factor into the question, into the decision they're making?
I think it's important, like knowing which tools are better for coding, but it's not the only choice. There's an ecosystem play here too. Like I would, if your primary use case is, or one of them is for your dev team to use these tools, I'm the bias towards Claude Code, but yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with Cursor. We've had really good luck with that too. I think we just wanted a more uniform skill set. But some of the others aren't as good at code, so I'd stay away from those. Like Gemini, I'd shy from. I haven't been pleased from the coding perspective. But yeah, I think any of the big players are pretty good. Codex actually is really good at coding as well, so I don't think you can really go wrong with any of them.
But if you look at the output, like the code that gets generated and the framework that it's written in, is there a framework or language that's dramatically better or worse to have the AI tools work in, or does it not matter so much? Like Rails versus TypeScript versus JavaScript, Golang.
TypeScript. I mean, that's what the bulk of the training is on, just because there's a large corpus of projects on there. It's a safe bet. So that's my default answer on probably any question in that realm. Just go with TypeScript, or if there's a front end component. I mean, if you have specific needs and or in a niche area, maybe it's different, but I'd start there and then walk through. Like for microservices, sometimes Golang makes sense. That works really well. Having types is really important, I found, just to ensure consistency. But I'd stay away from some of the esoteric languages, as cool as they are, and keep it simple.
Yeah, everyone has fun writing those languages, but no one's really writing code anymore. It's the AI's doing it, so it's better to choose the popular frameworks.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's another risk here too with the licensing. So like, we're big into Claude Code because it's, in our opinion, best in class right now. But Anthropic, and I'm sure they're similar. I don't like this is no shade on Anthropic, but just like the way the licensing works becomes like adds risk to an organization too, because as we've talked about with the team, Claude Code is where we're at right now, but there's no, like, we'll move where as the market moves, and we've already used Augment Code, we've used Cursor, now we're on Anthropic, but they're locking you into these annual licenses with no refunds. You can't switch from an annual license to a monthly license. So if you're trying to give your team the best tooling, you need to think about that risk. And it's something that's been top of mind with us, of like, how much are we really going to commit to these annual licenses that they want to get you into, or try to find other ways, monthly licenses, but you can't mix and match. So it's a whole headache. in and of itself, which is, not fun.
Yeah, without question, go with a monthly license, even if it's 20% more, because it gives you that flexibility and it allows you to select different licenses. Because if you prepay for an annual license and team members need to go up or down, you're out. And with monthly, it's a lot more flexible. And like you said, you can't change. So that's a big regret that I have is not doing that, thinking we'd save money. But I think we're going to end up getting either bit by it, or now we have the overhead of needing to create separate orgs with a different billing scheme. So for anyone listening that's having to make that decision, I would highly recommend you go with the monthly license.
All right, on to the second story. There's a gap showing up in the data. 84% of developers use AI coding tools every single day, but only 29% actually trust what the tools produce in production. That's a massive gap between adoption and confidence. So as we build with Claude Code and Cursor at Gnar, what's the actual governance process that lets you trust what ships? And how does the stack choice affect how easy it is to enforce that governance?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we've made significant time investment in our own tooling, and we were talking about this exact topic with the team last week and this week. And I think the summary for me is you really need to trust the process so that you can trust the code, right? Making sure you have linting, testing, same CI/CD, multi layers of testing. Going back to our previous set of questions, choosing a language that works well in that space. That's why I'm a big advocate for type safety, because it catches a lot of things that dynamic languages like Ruby, where sometimes you don't find out until runtime. And that has definitely bitten us. Not to throw shade on Ruby, but it's a pain point in why I really prefer TypeScript. But again, just building out a robust process for these tools so that you can trust them for shipping code, and you're not having to worry as much. And it's letting go for sure. I mean, that's something that you have to be able to push out that volume, but that's the way things are shaking out these days.
Yeah, I think that trust number two maps to what we're seeing and hearing about AI adoption generally. When we talk about when we talk to experts that are handling change management related to AI at a lot of large companies, they're saying that like 25% of people are fully embracing it, about 50% accept it as the new reality of their job, and 25% actively resist it. So there's a bit of a bell curve. And like, I think outside of that 25% that are embracing it, there's real trust issues, and maybe even some within that 25%, which kind of maps to the same 29% of folks that are trusting the output. So this seems very real to me and my experience. But to your point, there's all sorts of ways that you can lock down the AI or add guardrails to like have more trust in the output. But at the end of the day, you gotta let go and you kind of take the governor off and let it rip. And the cool thing with it is that if things break, you can fix them a lot faster than you used to be able to as well. So um, there's not really a way. I guess there is a way to kind of have some training wheels, but you're not going to get the impact of the tools unless you really take them off.
Yeah, that's an interesting analysis on the 29%. Where is that the AI champions? If we look at that segment that you described, and I bet you that's spot on. The folks that are more confident in it have that fluency and the process in place, where the skeptics are just not as familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of companies are really focusing on speed of output, right? Like there's the trust component, but then there's the speed. And I think a lot of the folks that I've talked to that have the trust issues with AI are because they're very experienced, and they can analyze the output and want to kind of pull the reins back on AI a little bit. Whereas some of the people that immediately say, "Whoa, this is awesome, this is amazing," those are like the non-technical folks that are just like, "Whoa, holy cow, I can make this whole application just by like throwing a prompt in this text box." So there's, I think those sorts of hooks and guardrails are crucial for getting the folks that like really know what they're doing comfortable with using the tool, because then you get the high amount of throughput with the high quality as well. It's kind of related to the vibe coding um, stuff we talked about last episode, but also leads to this next question um, that I have for you, which is for the CEO listening who's about to hire a dev shop that's pitching AI assisted development as a reason they're faster. What questions should they be asking to find out whether that speed is real or whether they're the future Monday morning incident?
I would zero in on what their process is. I think we've said the line on every podcast where one bad line of context or requirements is 100 lines of bad code. So if they don't have that process figured out and they're just diving right in and cranking out lines of code, that's going to result in Datadog or whatever APM you have buzzing on a weekend night. So it's all about front loading the requirements and understanding the product and process up front, and code is almost secondary because the robots are essentially doing that managed. We still own the code, but I just think of where we've been spending all of our time, and it's the process to code production. It's not the actual production in and of itself, and just having that conversation and understanding how they're working and what guardrails they have in place. Not, are you a 100x shop? Because it's quality. I mean, there is a quantity component, but at the end of the day, it's quality that matters to ensure that things aren't broken.
Yeah, I think speed's the easiest thing to claim from AI assisted work. There's no doubt that you can have a lot more throughput, but speed doesn't mean it's gonna work, right? And there's so many examples that we see of people getting the speed wobbles when they go a little too fast, and then they end up, you know, crashing and the app doesn't work. So I think it's critical to learn more about process, like you mentioned, like how are they making sure that the code actually works as expected? What do you do when it doesn't? And just diving in a little bit more to understand like how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Right. And just clarifying, like, what is the definition of speed? Because it kind of harkens back to when folks use lines of code as the unit of measure delivered. And that doesn't matter. What matters is features delivered, like working features delivered. And that's what should be focused on. Even when they're evaluating throughput, if someone says, "Oh, our devs are 50 or 20x," like none of that matters if it's just churning out a bunch of bad code. It's how many on your backlog, what's getting to done in Jira is all that matters at that level.
Yeah, that um, that's super true, and that it's not even code related. I think it's part of the journey with AI. Like you can produce so much so fast, but people also get very overwhelmed by the output of AI, and you're making all these documents that are dozens of pages and or producing just so much work so fast that if you're a developer, it's how do you review that much code? If you're you know in journalism, it's like how do you edit that much content? um, if you're just trying to do your job, like you're getting inundated with the amount of work that's getting done, and getting that work that is like technically done, that the AI like finished its draft of, over the finish line to actually deliver value to your organization in whatever way that is, like deploying a new feature to production or a new blog post or whatever it is, can become really hard. Like the amount of 80% done work is skyrocketing in the age of AI, but getting stuff to 100% is hard.
Takes 80% of the time.
Yeah, exactly. All right, third story. JetBrains surveys tens of thousands of developers every year. It's one of the most reliable data sources in the industry. They just published their April results. The headline is that Claude Code grew its adoption rate from 3% to 18% in under a year. And GitHub Copilot, which Microsoft's been pushing hard, has gone flat. The conclusion from the data: when a tool is just better, developers find it, even if the incumbent has more distribution. So the JetBrains finding performance over platform, developers choose the best tool. Does that change how you think about third-party services in a new SaaS build? Are we in a moment where best of breed just beats the integrated suite?
I don't know. That's a tough one to unpack. It's the classic yes, but I think there's a middle ground here, because like as we've seen, you have to commit to something. You can't just change everything overnight because it's a new hotness, but at the same time you can't stay married to something either, because you have an annual contract or it's a large incumbent. So I think there's probably a layered strategy here where you have a suite of tools that you more or less standardize on, but you're able to set yourselves up so that not if, but when something more effective comes along, like you have a process for evaluating it. So it's not scrambling last minute to jump in. But if it checks out and you validated that this is a tool that we should start to use, like you have a plan for migrating over to it. So it's almost like that it's not an if, but when you're going to be jumping on another tool. So just being comfortable with that and having a process for it for your team. And I think about some of the tools that we use, and we talked about this earlier, little things like skills. Like if you're able to select a platform that's compatible with agent skills, that sets you up a lot, because then you're standardized on this universally accepted standard for doing things, but you're not married to one platform. So, I think having that flexibility and having a process around it is how I'd evaluate it, versus feeling compelled to only stick with one because of all the churn that we've been seeing.
Yeah, I think Copilot, it's weirdly more of like a dated AI model in my mind. It was helpful to use it for tab completion back in the day when it was first released, but the industry's moved so far beyond that, which is crazy to think, because it was what, like, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago that was the case. It wasn't forever ago, but it never earned my trust in that I could give it a prompt or anything beyond tab completion and not have to tweak it. I always had to do some manual work to what I was to the output that I was getting from Copilot. But I will say its integration into GitHub, I think its distribution for code reviews within GitHub is meaningful. And to just be able to click the button to have Copilot review code, I think it does a good job reviewing code. That seems really solid. You don't have to think much about, your AI stack. It's integrated into the tool. But we've done a fair amount of switching around between the models, and it's one of those things where trust is kind of slow to build and easy to lose. And it never built for me with Copilot, but it built And then ChatGPT was kind of the base that everyone was using. And then as I got more and more exposed to Claude and Anthropic, I really rallied behind that because I thought the outputs were good to begin with, but it also gave all of these other tools and connectors and skills and all that that would just make the output so much better.
Yeah, and I gave a fairly generic, watered down response where I didn't get into specifics. And you touched upon that. Like Copilot isn't even on my radar for something that we'll use as like a proper like LLM. I don't even have it enabled on GitHub anymore because the Claude plugin is just as effective. We're already paying for it. I think where they're really focusing on building an ecosystem. There might not be as like flashy in the eyes of consumers, but it seems like amongst tech folks rather, they're an incumbent, and I think Codex is making inroads there, but I don't see Copilot ever gaining market share in the dev space, but could be wrong. Gemini was an interesting one for me too. I mean, I loved it because it came with our Google suite or Google Workspace, and the thinking side of it was pretty good. And I was pretty excited about their equivalent to Claude Code, but after using it, wasn't nearly as good. It's still, I'd have my eye on it, but I wouldn't jump in. But 1 year out, it could be a contender again. But I think things are stabilizing a little bit. I say that, and something new and big's going to come along. But yeah, I think we're going to see less churn and more folks rallying around sort of the big three.
Yeah, just give it a week.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I agree with you there. All right, let's jump into our main segment here. This is the stack we'd use if we were starting a B2B SaaS today. So before we get into specific tools, let's establish the mental model, because most founders make the mistake of asking, like, what's the best technology, when the right question is, what's the best technology for this team at this stage for this type of business? So let's start here. Before we pick any specific tools, what's the mental model for making stack decisions when you have limited runway and no margin for error?
I think mitigating for churn, and we talked about this earlier, but really understanding what your vision is for the product and what it isn't. And I know that's non-technical, but that's where all the problems that we typically encounter start with. So if you're not clear on what it is you're building, then it's just going to be a whole lot of churn and rework, versus if you say for V0, V1, MVP, whatever, defining here's what we need to ship. And then once you have that defined, then you start making the technical and architectural decisions. And then from there, I think we have our pretty vanilla suite of tools. Might differ a little bit, and we've already touched upon this, but I mean, I think TypeScript-based platforms are always a good starting point. I don't know if we want to get into the exact tech stack just yet, but we've got our usual suspects that we recommend there.
Yeah, I think the LLM tool is becoming more and more a part of the stack too, because it's what is, or you could even consider it like an employee almost, where it's the one that's actually producing the work and you have the humans guiding it and steering it. But I think it's important to consider in the stack what LLM you're using and what it will be good at producing.
Yeah, and thinking through some examples we've had, particularly on starting points, it's okay to start with a vibe-coded solution too. And that's a good exercise to hash out what I was talking about earlier, like define what the core functionality is. But I wouldn't recommend going to market with that. I would be extremely hesitant to say launch your production grade app from something you built in Lovable, but I think that's a really compelling way for non-technical folks to get their ideas on paper, maybe some of the visuals, and then hand that off to the dev team as is it a requirements artifact, not a, hey, here's this pile of spaghetti code, fix it up. I'd re-platform, but use that as a reference point.
Yeah, it's a communication tool.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
And we've always made the case for boring technology at Gnar. Back when humans were coding, we would always play the, keep it as simple as possible, use the established tech. And that's not saying we were, working in anything too ancient, but Ruby on Rails is an example where we enjoyed working that framework. The developer experience is good, but it's a secure, robust framework, test suite built in, and it was a natural choice. The answer to like boring technology seems to be changing now. I'm curious what you're thinking in terms of like that mentality. Are you still in on boring old tech, or has your mindset shifted?
I'd say for the most part, yes. When it comes to language and framework, I think I've probably my fifth time of saying on this episode alone, go start with TypeScript. You already touched upon why I don't reach for Ruby and Rails anymore. It's all about type safety, shrinking ecosystem. I don't want to hate on it. I was a Rubyist for years, but I think TypeScript with some framework, if your dev team is familiar with React, you can do no wrong with that. I have opinions on Next.js. It is kind of the default, but I don't like its security posture. I think there's a reason that Cloudflare rewrote Vinex, so at the very least, use that. I love SvelteKit and Svelte. That's my go-to stack at this point. And if I were to be CTO of a SaaS company, I'd go with SvelteKit, maybe with Drizzle as the ORM running on Cloudflare. They're bulletproof, super reliable, pretty straightforward. I think where boring starts to get a little more blurry with me is all the new tech stuff that you're going to need related to AI, because more and more products need that level of integration. So when you get into vector databases and things of that nature, they just haven't been around long enough to have truly boring tech. I mean, you could make the case for Postgres and PG Vector, but there might be other tools that are better suited for your need that are new. So you're going to have to make some decisions there. But when there is an option to choose boring tech, go with it. And then for specific niche areas or needs, and just make a very data-driven decision on what you're optimizing for.
Yeah, you touch on this piece a little bit, but how do you build the stack so that AI features can be added later without a rewrite? What does AI ready architecture mean to you?
That's a good question. And I'm thinking through like how we model engagements, and a lot of the setup work that I talked about, and we call it ideate when we're in the ideation phase, but it's more than just a PRD. So when we're thinking about building out these products, there is a technical component, and we're laying out what the architecture is, and it's something that's as complicated or probably as simple as you need it and nothing more. But there's other pieces on top, like a sane data model to begin with. Don't do anything weird. I don't like document stores or anything like that. If you don't need it, keep it simple as much as you can. Define that up front, from your data model to your infrastructure stack, and then build upon it. But the more planning you can do up front, the better. And I found that's working a lot better for us than kind of winging it on the fly, and it makes it a lot more extensible. And then I think just following all the good old fashioned best practices that we've always followed. Like, I think good engineering best practices haven't shifted that much in this new world that we live in, right? It's still, we want good tests, composable code, following a framework so that both you and AI know where things live, conventions and standards, all of that stuff I think is still really important. You're just doing it a lot faster.
All right, so wrap up this section then with telling me about the Gnar stack today. What is it? Is there anything you change about it?
Playing this out because it's not singular, right? But and I mentioned it a little bit, if I were a CTO, my tech stack would be probably SvelteKit. But I think for infrastructure, my go-to is Cloudflare to start with. If it covers all of your bases, it's just, they've got a wonderful dev environment. Deployment story is super easy. It's incredibly robust, and I just don't have to think about it. So really happy with that. I will take that any day over Vercel or some of the other tools. It also happens to be even cheaper, which is a bonus too. But if costs were the same, I'd still go with Cloudflare. On the tech side of things, I again am biased towards SvelteKit, but might be needing React ecosystem. So I'd probably gravitate towards Vinext if you need to go with Next, or we've had really good luck using like CanStack or Remix. And then for typical app on the database side, that's the only caveat that I'll say with Cloudflare is their D1 is a very robust battle-tested flavor of SQLite, and I haven't hit scalability issues there, but it also limits you on some of the ecosystem that Postgres offers. So if I think it's just a matter of time until they come out with D2, which is Cloudflare's Postgres offering. But if that's a must, Supabase is something that we reach for pretty regularly, super happy with it. And because it's agnostic, you can use it for any other runtime platform. Trying to think, anything else that we reach for? We keep it pretty simple on the tech side of things. Obviously, GitHub, that's for CI/CD. We get as much as we can out of GitHub Actions.
Adonis.js has been a great full stack TypeScript framework we've used a lot.
Yeah, if you're having to get into building like really robust APIs or need something with a little more depth than what some of the more, I'd say, Next.js influenced frameworks provide. Yeah, that has been a good one. But I think the pattern here is pretty clear. We've been heavily into TypeScript land, where 5-10 years ago we were big into Ruby Rails. We've done a little bit with Golang, but that's usually for a very specific reason. So it's not something we reach for regularly. But yeah, I think that mostly covers it.
Cool. And I think one important thread there is it's less important what your team is familiar with and more important what the LLMs are familiar with. Obviously, it helps to have experience, but in the example of like Golang, for example, super easy to pick up, and is one that the LLMs can have a lot of learning on. Especially, I think Gemini with Golang is probably going to get increasingly just improve a lot more.
Yeah, I did put a little bit of shade on Gemini when it came to coding, but I have built a few CLI apps in Golang, and it did really well there. I imagine their training model has a lot of Golang reference code bases there, and if that's your ecosystem, it works really well.
Awesome. All right, well, that's episode 3. If you're sitting on a stack decision right now, someone on your team's pushing you for shiny new frameworks, or you're not sure what to build your next product on, I hope this gave you something concrete. The answer is almost always simpler than you think. Great people, good process, boring technology. That's what ships. Drop a comment and tell us what you want us to go deeper on. And if you've been wondering whether your team is actually ready for AI tools, take the free 2-minute assessment at ai-assessment.thegnar.com. It tells us exactly where you stand. Link is in the show notes. See you in the Gnar.